Hello, everyone. So I'm coming to you in the evening. It's kind of weird, y'all, right? Because it's daylight savings time. So my days are running past me. I don't know about you guys, but my days are definitely running past me. So I'm coming to you in the evening, not to talk long, but we're going to talk about. I'm here with my friend, the author Pamela Bailey. And Pamela has a project. And you know what? Pamela is actually the one responsible for me really, truly connecting with my heritage, right? She gifted me my ancestry.com, which was really a gift for Ancestry because they've been hitting me up for about $80 every quarter, Pamela. Right? So the name of Pamela's project is the Antebellum Diaspora Project. And we're going to find out more about what that means in a minute. Um, but, since I had my live, was it yesterday? Seems like it was Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah, it was since I had my live yesterday. Pamela and I have been talking, and she's been sharing resources with me. And I've been talking to a lot of you everywhere I go. I've been every single where I go. I'm running into people that are telling me that they saw my live and they've had similar experiences. And so Pamela and I was talking. We're like, you know what? Let's just have a conversation. So, and she is going to lead that conversation with for me, for us. And if you're going to watch this on repeat, we appreciate you watching this on repeat. You can go ahead and put your comments in if you guys have any comments. And then later on, as the days and weeks go by, I'm sure the author will go in and answer, respond to your comments. Okay. So it's 7:30 on a Thursday. I thank you so much, Pamela, for just agreeing to have this conversation live on Facebook, on YouTube, and we're also on Twitter right now. So I thank you so much for being willing to be so upfront with it to have this conversation. So can you take a minute and introduce yourself and your project?
I absolutely will. I'm excited to be with you and to talk to you tonight. I think I started off earlier telling you I'm from Mullins, South Carolina. And when I am doing anything, when I'm talking about my project or I'm presenting at a conference, that's the first thing that I want to share with people because I'm very proud of who I am. I'm proud of where I come from. I'm proud of my ancestry in Mullins specifically, but all over the Carolinas. And so I do also share that I am from the region of the Native Indigenous Pedi tribes as well, because I want to give credit to the people who lived there before any of us populated this area. And the tribe still exists there. So I want to be respectful to all people. And this is kind of how this conversation kind of came about. And so I got an opportunity to watch your live too. I'm in Dallas, Texas, but I do tune in because, again, I am very close in my heart to Mullins, and I write a lot about South Carolina. And so you mentioned my project, which is the Antebellum Diaspora Project. And that project, I'm finding my family that's been separated by slavery since the 1600s, actually. My focus is actually on the antebellum era, but I'm finding people all over this country using DNA genealogy and also using, social media. So I found people from here to Germany that I'm related to. And the thing that we have in common is that we are all descended from people who were emancipated in 1865. And it wasn't until the last few years that I've been actually long gone from Mullins that I learned how rich the history is there. That
Yeah. Can you go
it's
back a
so
little
rich.
bit? Can you go back a little bit? Can you
Yes,
explain what the antebellum era is?
sure,
1865 is when slavery, quote unquote, ended.
right.
So what do you mean by the antebellum era?
So the first enslaved people were brought to South Carolina in the 1600s, around 1664. And between 1664 and about 1808, you had people being bought in from Africa and then also bought in from the islands because the English had been enslaving people for a long time and taking them to the Caribbean islands. And they were bringing those people after they were quote unquote seasoned from the Caribbean islands to the Carolinas and to other colonies. This is before we were even a country. And so
Mhm.
our family has been here and established, here in the colonies, even before we were a country. So what happened is there was a law passed that said at some point that there can be no more people, Black people, brought into this country for the purpose of slavery. That ended the transatlantic slave trade. So what happened essentially is a lot of the abolitionists, both here in this country and in England, thought that slavery was going to come to an end, because we were not bringing people back in legally. We thought that was going to be it. But there were a couple of things that were happening at the same time. Eli Whitney in the state of South Carolina invented the cotton gin. So now it was a whole lot easier to harvest cotton, to separate that seed out of that cotton. And so, people could pick more cotton and it could be processed and it could make slaveholders more money.
Right.
It was licensed to other states as the country was growing. So now we were going into Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and our families that were here in the Carolinas, in the original colonies, I should say, were now being sold and transported and moved to other Southern slavery states. And so as a result of that, our families have been torn apart, some families as many as 20 generations.
And we can't let New York off the hook either,
Right.
right? Because slaves were traded in New York on the stock market as a commodity, right?
They
So,
were indeed.
hmm
And so we tend to think of this as being just something that farmers did or plantation holders did, but this slavery was the basis of the economy. You had factories that they sent the cotton from the south to the north, to make it into thread and for bulk amounts. And then, like I said, once the some of the northern states who were in business with the southern states, I mean, you could enslave people for collateral. If you
right.
go to visit some states here in the South, Alabama still has a bank that's in existence that when a farmer or a plantation holder or a hotel, because we didn't all do just agricultural work. Some of us our family members were very highly skilled laborers. But if the slave holder couldn't make a banknote, they would literally take those people and lock them in the bottom of the bank. They were literally collateral.
Wow.
So there's so much about this history, but
There
most of
is,
it,
and
yeah.
you know what? We're being right here. I actually had an opportunity to visit the Fusky Island, off right off of Hilton Head.
Hmm.
And on that island, the main crop was indigo.
Hmm.
And so at that point, indigo was the only thing in the world that would make the color blue.
Hmm.
And there was something else that made the color red. So royalty was the color purple. So, the indigo from right off of Hilton Head Island was being exported to London.
Yes.
So even though UK, they like to tout that they ended slavery before the US did, but yet still they were buying goods produced by Africans that were enslaved.
Well, and let's be real, it honestly is a little bit of a disingenuous claim. Not only were they buying goods, they may have ended it in the places where they lived in the UK, but on the islands, they were still maintaining slavery.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't, where they lived, but they still allowed it and still profited very highly from it.
And we're talking about 1860s. That's not ancient history by any stretch of the word.
It's
And
not.
there's others that want us to believe that is ancient history.
Hmm.
That way that they can, I almost used the slave trope, which was whitewash. So you sent me an article that I read that had all of those different words that come out of slavery that we didn't know. So I'm
Hmm.
not going to use that word, but they try to wipe away the history by saying, oh, that was ancient history, but it wasn't. Not at all. Not
It's
in any
not.
stretch of the word is it ancient history.
Right. Not only is it not ancient history, let me just tell you that my grandfather and grandparents lived on Barnes Street in Mullen, South Carolina.
Okay.
My grandmother's father was born in 1862. He was
Mm,
born enslaved.
yes.
So that's my grandmother's father. That's my great grandfather. So we're not talking about 10 generations back. My mother's grandfather was born enslaved.
Well,
Now,
my mom is a great grandmother to my grandchildren.
right,
Right?
right.
So if you're thinking like that, think about like in my case, it's my mother,
Hmm.
so this is all recent. This is not ancient. So when we
It's
go back to thinking about these words, right? And the
mhm.
words that are being used, it's like, here's the generation, as those words were passed down between our generations, people who look like me, those words were also passed down between generations of people who don't look like me, and they may be insensitive to those facts.
Absolutely, because it's been a part of our culture, specifically in that area and other slavery states forever. I will say that my great grandmother, Ella Prince Rames Davis, lived on the house on Front Street. Her mother was born into slavery. And Ella, I knew until she passed away when I was about 7.5 years old. So
Mm,
we are so close to this. And so it's really important that people understand. One of the reasons that I do what I do is to be able to share our family's humanity. That these are not just, ticks on a census record. They're not just documents in a sale, of an estate. Like these are people that look like us and thought like us. And even some of the things that we have interest in are the same things that our ancestors were interested in.
yeah.
I was sharing with you earlier, I cooked chicken bog today, by coincidence. I cook it, a couple times a month because it's one of my family's favorite dishes. And it specifically comes from our ancestral history in the PD region specifically. That's
Right.
the only place in this country that chicken bog is one of the dishes, one of the regional dishes.
My whenever anybody comes here to visit us, we always have chicken bog, and they say, "What is it?"
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to tell you.
Right. And we tell them it's not Perlo, it's not gumbo. It is something that we can say that was created by our ancestors. And the fact that I can teach that, how to prepare that to my daughter and to my son in the hopes that maybe my grandchildren or great grandchildren will continue to cook it, like that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. So if we and I know I appreciate you saying that I didn't have to rehash what happened Tuesday, right? But I'm going to. Let me tell you why I'm going to. Because it did hurt. It still hurts.
Mhm.
But essentially, what happened was I'm sitting in a city council meeting, and there's an elected official who goes up to talk, who is also an employee of the city of Mullins, which I live in Mullins, and I have a business in Mullins, and I have other houses in Mullins, other houses that we own. We do rentals, and so he goes up to speak, and he talks about he gives his report. We're listening attentively. He gives us a report, and then he talks about how he's hired some new employees. And there's one specific employee, he said, who's in charge of maintenance, which is which is a trigger word for me when a white man talks about a black man doing maintenance, right? We got out of janitor to custodian and things like that, so that was a trigger word to kind of set up, right? Like, okay, where's this conversation going? And then from there, he went to this particular gentleman must be really hungry
Mm.
because he's doing such a great job. And it was beyond offensive. And for me, it shook me to my core. I was sitting there, can't believe my ears, right? And when you hear something like this, you're kind of expecting somebody's going to correct it
Mhm.
because everywhere when I speak, sometimes you misspeak, you use miswords, or whatever. So it didn't get corrected, right? These words he said did not get corrected. And then as I'm leaving the meeting, I'm talking to others who are having the same feeling of complete and utter shock. So I said, you know what? I can't hold it. Before I left the parking lot, I sent a text message to this gentleman. using that term lightly. And I asked him, I said to him, I said, listen, the words you said hurt, they were deeply offensive. And if you want to know why, ask me. And he has not. Now, maybe he feels as though he's not going to ask me, he's not going to respond to my text message because I went public. However, you're an elected official, you're a paid employee of the city in which I live and pay quadruple taxes. So I have an issue with all of that.
Right.
And and since then, um, everywhere I've went today, everywhere I went today, somebody pulled me to the side and talked to me about it. Said
Hmm.
they saw my live and they can relate. And some of the conversations started off with, that particular gentleman, um, I don't think he meant it that way. Sometimes his words get away with him. And I said, and that's what we need to change. That's what people need to change because words hurt.
Hmm.
And what I am more concerned about, Pamela, to tell you the truth, is what happens because this person is in a position of authority over our children. What happens when there's no adult there to hear? When there's nobody there to say, what the heck did you say? What is he saying to our children?
Hmm.
So I question his even competency to be in an employee working with children. And again, this has been 2 days now. That was Tuesday. This is Thursday. At any point, a return of my text message, and a public apology, the same way this thing went out all over the internet on Facebook, I think, Pamela, that would have been more than due.
It would have been amazing. Now, I said to you that one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this, and I thought it was really important, is because I do love that you took initiative to actually reach out. I think that's really important because when somebody does that, in my opinion, it sounds like it's somebody who wants to have a resolution. It was an opportunity to say, maybe I didn't understand. Can you please expound? Maybe, I misheard something, or maybe you meant something differently. But can we talk about this? Can you tell me exactly what that meant? Or what was your intention? What were you trying to say when you did that? You know, so I love that you did that. I think it's always good to try to find a resolution.
Yeah,
I think it's also a fair expectation that you would expect, and again, this is not necessarily a personal thing. It is because we want our leaders to be servant leaders,
right.
right? And so we know that once we are elected and we're in a position, doesn't really matter who even voted for us. When we fulfill the position, we sort of take that oath of office to say that we're going to be representative of all the people. And that means that we're going to be responsive as well. And so I had read, I want to share just really quickly with you a little story. I had read this some time ago, and I just thought this is sort of the leadership that I admire and that I would want to be were I in that kind of a position. So there is a woman from South Carolina, very renowned all over the world, actually. And she is a native South Carolinian. Her name is Marion Wright Edelman. She's from Bennettsville. And she is the founder of the Children's Defense Fund, but she has worked with Martin Luther King, has worked for several presidents. She is the first African American woman to sit on the board of directors for Yale University. She's a graduate of Spelman. And she talks about some things that happened in her career early on. And
Mhm.
one of those things was she was tapped sort of last minute to speak at a community event where it was going to be largely to a Polish community. She had not grown up in a community in Bennettsville, South Carolina, where there were a lot of Polish people. But the community that she was living in at the time, she had only ever heard Polish people spoken about in a derogatory term. She
Mm.
literally had no idea that the term that she had put into her speech and had done this amazing speech, so she thought, that she was using a slur towards these people. But
Wow.
someone cared enough about her to pull her coattail and say to her, you have to understand that you've just done this speech and you've insulted these people. Like, you've made them feel pretty bad because they wanted to have you here. We thought you would be, the right person to give this speech because we know where your heart is. But your words didn't match your heart because you spent your time using this slur. And she said she was mortified, absolutely mortified. But this was before social media. The thing that she did was she made sure that she was a presence in that community so that she could go back and apologize. She wanted people to know that what she did and what she said was out of ignorance, that it was not her heart and not her intention to hurt the people that she had come to speak to.
Awesome.
So it's sometimes when we misspeak, and we all do. I have done interviews and I've said the wrong thing, or I've even had an interview with a reporter and I've been misquoted and it's been very upsetting. But it's always been my heart to make sure that people know what my intent is.
Yes. And Trevor Noah, did you read his book?
I have not.
Oh, it's awesome. But in his book, he tells a story. And in his story, he explains the insensitivity to the word Hitler.
Mm,
And you got to read the book. It's awesome because he tells the story, and it was the same thing. It's like, he did not realize that this word was offensive to the people, and it's highly offensive. We know that word is highly offensive, right?
hmm
So I appreciate, and that's it. So I appreciate if somebody can be big enough to say, you know what, I misunderstood. I didn't understand that these words that I used, although they weren't about you, right, that they were triggering. Because the simple fact that others are saying things to me about other words that were used, and also this specific set of words,
hmm
how it was triggering for them as well, right? So not listening to me, not returning my text, not attempting to reach out, you're basically discounting all of our feelings.
And that's not good. And like I said, especially from the perspective of servant leadership. And it would be really awesome if there can be a resolution. But one of the things I wanted to share about today, because as I'm doing research for my project, I do a lot of, studying about, slavery history and the residual of that history.
Mhm.
There's so many things that are still very prevalent in our society that we don't even know.
Right.
There are things that we hear people say all the time, and this would be my hope, that maybe he wasn't aware. But I want to make sure that other people who have grown up in our community and similar communities are aware that there are things that have been passed down from generation to generation to generation. And you may have repeated them or said them, without ever thinking about what the effect is on someone whose family has been affected by it personally. And it's time for us as a community to do better. One of the things I think about all the time doing this DNA is that we are literally family.
Yeah.
We are literally family. And most of the people, both Black and white, from the PD region of South Carolina, which I think I heard you say your family's from King Street, which is included in
Yeah.
the PD area,
Hmm.
our families have been there for generations.
Right.
And on either side of this history, you do a DNA test, you're going to find some cousins.
Yeah. And you know
And
what is so cool? I am finding cousins. And not only am I finding cousins, I'm helping long lost cousins. Did I tell you about my one cousin that reached out to me through the DNA, and he had been trying to find his father, and he only knew his father by the first name?
oh
The
no,
first name that he knew his father by was a nickname. So there was no way he could research it. So because he connected to me,
wow.
and I knew his father by his nickname, he's been able to meet his brothers and sisters, his
Wow.
extended family. He came to our Super Bowl party. It's just really great to be able to connect with family, but to connect with roots because Pamela, that's something that was stolen from African Americans,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where
Yes.
others, I'll be in business meetings and people say, "Oh yeah, my family came here from Ireland, or my family came here from England, and in 1912 or whatever year that their families migrated to America."
Mm-hmm.
We have no clue.
Right.
A lot of
You're
us.
right. You're right. So even when we do the DNA test, that usually with my European friends, they do the DNA test. There may be two places that their families come from. And for many of us, there may be, 8, 10, 12 places that our families come from.
Mhm.
And we know all of that is a result of our history. And like I said, it's just like DNA. The history is just what it is.
Yeah.
Nobody here today is responsible for that history, but we are responsible to the history.
Right.
And so we have to be really sensible. I'm not going to even say sensitive, but we got to be sensible, and we got to know that we owe each other, just as human beings, basic neighbors, that we owe each other, some respect. And, that whole idea that, we don't have to change. This is how it's always been. And this is not even about wokeness. You know what I'm saying? That people have taken that word and run away with it. This is about
They
being
making it up.
but this is about being just a good neighbor, being a decent human being. And, most of us who grew up in the PD region grew up going to a church, some to a synagogue. But, all of what we're learning as Christians, in particular, is that we have to love each other. We've got to love our neighbors and be responsible to one another. So if what I'm saying offends you, it is my obligation to not offend you any longer. And if you care about relationship, and I liken this to even a marriage. I've been married for 32 years, thank God, to a good man, hoping that we're going to be married literally till death us do part. But I know that sometimes to maintain this marriage, we have to have some difficult conversations. And we have to tell one another that what you said hurt me.
Mhm.
What you did hurt me. But
Mhm.
when someone cares about you and they're vested in you, they will do what they need to do to not do that thing anymore. And so that's why I really, like I said, wanted to come on this live and talk about this because, again, and just share just a little bit more information with you because these things have permeated our society for so long. They've become a regular part of our vocabulary. And we're not even aware that these tropes, these words that we use, that they are heavy, that they are offensive, and that if we are using these things, we need to stop. We need to consider our neighbors and think about how people feel. Because the other thing I think people don't realize, because this history is still so close to us, these kinds of things can be triggering.
Right.
So they are downright hurtful. So, like I said, I'm hoping that people are interested in learning and becoming educated so they can say, now that I know better, I want to do better. That's the hope.
And I have some friends. I have but I'm gonna say a few white friends that reached out, and two different people just sent me a heart emoji. They
Hmm.
didn't need to say nothing.
Hmm.
They didn't need to say anything at all. And if
Hmm.
you're watching this, those two people, they know who they are. That meant so much,
Hmm. It
right?
does.
It's
It
like
does.
we don't need to dialogue about what happened.
No,
What
no.
they did by sending me that heart emoji is they said, "You know what? I realized no matter what happened that it hurt you."
That part. Because again, unless it's your experience, very often it's difficult to relate. Like people can have empathy, but unless they understand, and this is really interesting. I work in higher education. I have for almost 10 years now. And it's
Mhm,
so interesting because when I talk to people, I just recently bought a home and we were trying to decide where we wanted to live. And one of my concerns in buying a home in Dallas, which is pretty progressive, is that I wanted to make sure that I was in a community that when my son was visiting me, that if he wanted to go for a run or a walk around my community, he'd be okay.
right,
So that was important to me as the price point of the house.
right.
So I think people don't understand fully, if it's not their experience, how much this history still affects our lives today in terms of how people see us, how people treat us. Again, just hoping that our kids, can make it home alive if they go out for a jog. Like these are real concerns. And I am so grateful. Again, I've got friends from, all across the world here in Dallas. I've got friends from India and Pakistan and, China and Turkey. And these are my friends. I'm talking about people who come to my house and have a meal,
Right.
you know. And it's important that even though they don't understand or haven't had my experience, when I tell them that something has hurt me, they want to understand. They
Right.
want me to be well.
Right.
They don't want me to be afraid for my children. So just having that kind of compassion for people is important. And again, this is not a political thing. It is not about, Democrat or Republican. It's about humanity.
Yeah.
And my thought always is, and I love this because I'm not a biblical scholar, um, but I'm like many of you who've been in church my whole life, and my spiritual life is very important. But we talk about those 10 commandments, but that 11th commandment, we are told that we have to love each other the way that God loves us.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can't do that, then the rest of it doesn't even matter.
Right.
It doesn't matter. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share, so that we don't take too much time, a few words that I want people to be aware of that they may not know come from this slavery history. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So one of the things, as I just told you, I just purchased a new home, and I learned, as I was looking at homes and being shown homes, and you probably see this as if you've watched HGTV, that people no longer say in the real estate game, at least in larger cities, they no longer say master bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because that word comes from the slavery experience.
Right.
And who
I
knew?
when you sent me that article, that's the first time, and I'm in real estate.
Mhm,
South Carolina is completely different.
mhm.
I didn't realize that.
Right.
I,
So now they say primary bedroom. And so
right?
here's the thing. If that's what you want to call it at your house, that's fine. But now that you know that that could be offensive to me,
Don't say it.
then if you're showing me a house, you may not want to say that.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that cost you to not offend me?
0.
Zero. So those are the little things that people can do. Another one is, and I'm just checking my notes because I wanted to make sure that I got some of the important ones. Another one is I've had to correct several people over the years as a grown woman, and I'm in my 50s, for calling me gal. To
Good job.
me, that word is offensive
Mhm.
because that's what was my mother and my grandmother and her mother was called.
Wow.
Now, their contemporaries, white women, were women and ladies. But no matter how old, how much older the person was speaking to her, she was referred to as a gal.
Wow.
And so, again, when I'm talking to people, I just let them know, I don't get angry. I don't want to fight. I just say that, that word is offensive to me. And if you wouldn't mind just calling me Pamela,
Right.
or Mrs. Bailey, whatever, those are the options that you have. But that word definitely has a connotation from a very difficult past.
Hmm.
Some of the other words are uppity. Now, this is something that when I talk to my aunties, at some point, I come from a family, Miko, that I'm very proud of. My family, the women in my family are very prissy women. And I love that even to this day. And I found out during my research that their aunties, my mother and her sisters, their aunties were also very prissy women too. Even to the point when they were going to work in fields. Their father was a farmer. They made sure that they rolled their hair up on those paper hair rollers at night because they wanted to look nice in the field. Because even if they were doing manual labor, they were still women.
Okay.
And they wanted to be recognized as lovely women, the lovely women that they were. And so it's so important that, when they were going downtown to do business or whatever they were doing, they were very well dressed. And back in the day with my great aunts, you would wear a hat and your gloves and take your little pocketbook to do whatever little business that you were doing. And sometimes when they were approached by white men, and they were not responsive, they were called uppity. There were situations where families were pretty prosperous, even under all of the Jim Crow laws and those kinds of things that were put in place to keep Black people in our community included from being successful. People managed to still eke out a good living. Some of them left to go get educations and
So
became
Jim Crow laws, I want to unpack that for a second. So Jim
okay.
Crow laws included things like white and black sinks,
Right, right.
uh,
So
fountains for drinking,
correct,
where
correct.
blacks had to go to the back door,
Right.
and whites had to go. Those were Jim Crow laws. That was legally sanctioned
Mm-hmm.
discrimination, segregation, where people who look like blacks on the back of the bus, where we had, we were like the second class citizens. Hey Reagan, I see you, Queen. Where we were on the back of the bus, right? Those were all the Jim Crow laws.
Right. Now, can I tell you that was my experience?
What?
That when I moved here from New York, my mother was and father were born in Mullins.
Hmm.
Both of my older siblings were born in South Carolina. I was the only of the children that was born in New York. My parents spent a little time there, but I lived in South Carolina starting at 4.5 years old, and I can remember being 7, 8, 9, and going to the doctor's office and going to the dentist's office and having to go through the side or the back door.
While other people could go to the front.
That is correct.
Wow. You said
That's
you could
my
go.
experience. And
Wow.
it finally got to a point where my mother had had enough. And she said, if I'm paying what they're paying, I will not go through the back door or the
I'm
side
going in
door.
the front. Look
So
at that.
again, we tend
And
to want to think,
one of my because I grew up in the north, and
mm-hmm,
one of my I'm a Claiborne fellow,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and one of my fellows had told me, she says, Miko, look at main streets in South Carolina. She says every main street that you're on has back doors,
mm-hmm,
these back doors. And she said that's because that's where African Americans would be served at.
mm-hmm,
And so now I can't help but to look that way. So like no matter what town I'm in, I'm looking at these back doors on main streets, right? And so we now Pick 42 Foundation, my employer, has an office location on Main Street. And so we have a back door. And nothing about the business that was there before us, but the business that was there before us just had people coming in the back door all the time. I forbid it. And as a matter of fact, it's so funny. It's a joke in my office with my employees.
mm-hmm.
Because they're like, Miko, my car is right there. I'm like, I don't care. Walk out the front door, walk around
Right,
the building. You're going to
right,
get these steps, right? It's
mm-hmm,
just like, there's no way. We pay rent to be on Main Street.
mm-hmm,
We have beautiful front doors that we have decorated, right?
mm-hmm.
Our our clients that we serve will be served from the front, all
Right.
with dignity.
Right. So, and I wanted to share that because, again, I'm not talking about something that I'm not aware of. These are not rumors. This is
Wow,
not a story that's been passed down. That was my experience being a child living in Mullins. So, again, it's not been that long ago. And so there is some residual. And there may be a lot of people who are much younger than I am who don't know that, who don't know that this was ever even a thing.
right.
But again, I like to think that I'm not ancient. So,
We're not. We're not. We are
we're not.
not.
We're
Yeah.
not. But I want to talk about a word that's become a dirty word,
Oh,
and it's not. And it's important for people to understand. And I want to share a little bit of an example. I'm actually going to read this explanation because I think it's a really good explanation.
okay.
So, people, and we've had this to happen to us here in Texas, and I've even had my daughter lose a friendship over it because people are adamant that they are not privileged. And I again understand that people don't, because they're not consciously participating. We need people to understand it may not even be something that they are doing. It is a system that has been put in place. It can be something as simple and that's unwritten or unspoken, where I've gone into a store. It still happens. I go into a store and I'm waiting in line, and someone just steps right up to the counter. And the person behind the counter saw me standing there. but they take the person that doesn't look like me. Now, sometimes another person may say, hey, wait a minute, she was standing there.
Right.
That's a person who understands their privilege and decides, I'm going to use my privilege for good. I'm going to speak up
Right.
because what just happened was not the right thing to do.
Right.
So I just want to read this real quickly. It says, privilege is an unearned access or advantage granted to specific groups of people because they just belong to a specific group. So it's not something that's been earned or merited. It's written into the system, which has always been the case in this country. Now, one of the things that really, kind of cut close for me living in Mullins, a lot of the homes that my family literally built with their hands on Mullins Street, on Church Street, on Front Street, on Barn Street, those homes, until they were recently destroyed by some of the storms that have come through. Those homes were built by my family's hands. My
Mhm.
Uncle Bernie who lived close to Wine Street, was a brick mason. And, my uncle who just recently passed away, my uncle James MacArthur, was a roofer. So my father's family, they were skilled laborers. So they were able, for generations to actually build their own homes. But there was in the 1940s an initiative by FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He wanted to kind of jumpstart the economy. And so one of the things that he did was created the Veterans Housing Plan. And
Mhm.
if you had been a veteran in World War I, World War II, and some of the subsequent wars, you would be able to get a loan,
Right.
a VA loan. And that was supposed to be for all veterans. Now, there were almost 2.4 million loans that were given out as a part of that program. Out of that 2.4 million, 98%, over 2.3 million, went to white soldiers.
Yeah.
Less than 2% went to Black soldiers. My grandfather served on a ship that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was on at the time of the outbreak of the flu epidemic. They were present. So the people who went to go get those loans and who benefited from those loans, they didn't tell the bankers, I don't think, don't give them loans, but it was built into the system.
It's built into privilege. And Jim Clyburn I recently saw him about a couple weeks ago, Representative Clyburn,
Hmm.
and he's addressing that
Oh,
with
wow.
yeah, I'll see if I can find it. But he was on MSNBC and he talked about that specifically. And let me
Wow.
tell you what he said, what he wants to do. And it's him and another rep, and the other rep is white. So he has a bill that says this. It says, because your grandfather was not given that GI Bill
Hmm.
that will allow him to buy a house, because home ownership is generational wealth.
It is.
So what he's saying is because your great grandfather wasn't able to get that GI loan to buy the house that somebody else with privilege did get. Now your father didn't inherit the house,
Hmm.
because your father didn't inherit the house, neither did you.
Hmm.
So he's saying with this bill is that not reparations, it's just fixing what was done wrong. Because
On
we know
purpose.
who on purpose. We know who served in the military. We
Right.
know what they should have gotten. We know
Hmm.
what they didn't get. We know
Hmm.
because they didn't get it, we didn't get it.
Right.
And he said he tried it before and he's gonna try it again. Big ups to Representative Clyburn, but check that out.
I didn't.
It may be on his page.
I didn't know that that was happening. That's exactly what happened. And so, as you were saying, we know just as it is today, home ownership is one of the ways that we do have generational wealth. I
Yes.
had an opportunity to meet a scholar in Sumter, South Carolina, just an amazing woman who literally has always been on the right side of this history. She's an educator there. And when I met her, I was able to interview her at her grandson's house. That home had been her husband's family's home that he inherited. She gave it to her son, and her son gave it to his son. And so this young man He owns a business, but he'll never have to pay a day of rent. And to be able to have that kind of jump start in life would have been amazing for our families.
It is amazing. And now, I
Mhm.
mean, like even our house in New Jersey, right? When we moved, we stayed in the house for like 10 years. It
Mhm.
appreciated 100%. So,
Mhm.
like, folks, when you're out there and people, and you're afraid of taking on that 30-year mortgage, take on that 30-year mortgage. You will never pay it for 30 years,
Mhm.
right? If you get in a house, it appreciates 100%. And in this case, it was 10 years, right? It
Mhm.
appreciates 100% in 10 years. You take that money and you put it into your other house, which will then appreciate, right? So these houses have major cash value. And me as a property manager, right? So a lot of the houses around here, we buy a house for $25,000. We put 50,000 in it, so we put 75,000 in it, and then in 3 months we sold it for 125,000.
Wow.
That's wealth,
It is.
right?
And it's still an affordable price for someone to own a home.
Exactly, because of where we are, right? That
Mhm.
same house where you are would be 4 times that price. But, we could go
Mhm.
on and on, honey. I I just appreciate your time. I appreciate this space. And for anybody who's watching this on replay, I thank you for watching this. I thank you for, you guys that are coming up to me on the street, keep doing it. Let's keep having this conversation. Let's keep talking about when words hurt, and that we shouldn't be hiding, right? When somebody says something, call them on it, and give them an opportunity. You don't got to do it the way I did it. Right? I tried to give them a 24-hour opportunity, maybe not exactly 24 hours, from 7 o'clock p.m. that night to 9 o'clock in the morning, because it hurt so deep. But maybe not do it the way I do it, but let's start doing it, folks.
We do have to start doing it. Again, you know, it's Mullins has been and still is an amazing community.
It's
I mean,
awesome.
just some of the finest, just upstanding, decent people I've ever known. And I can say, and I don't mind saying this, no matter where I go, no matter what I do, it's that community that has shaped me. And again, I'm so proud that that is my hometown, will always be my hometown. And
Awesome.
I want to have the option to move back to a place where I think that that's just and fair.
Yes.
And that if I'm blessed one day to have grandchildren, that they'll want to come and spend summers with me. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So we have to do
And
our
you know what,
part.
though? It's awesome.
It is
Mullins
awesome. It
is
is
an
awesome.
absolutely awesome place, because look at this crazy chick from Reagan said that's why she loves Mullins. But this crazy chick from New Jersey and this doggone mouth, they've embraced me.
Mm-hmm.
They've
Mm-hmm.
embraced me. They've embraced my family. They embraced my kids, my grandkids. I absolutely love it here. And I feel like I owe it to Mullins and
Mm-hmm.
Marion County
Mm-hmm.
to do everything I can to make it not a better place, because I think it's a great place.
Mm-hmm.
Make it the best place.
The best place it can be. Can I share one quick thing with you? I see we're
Yeah.
running out of time, but I saw this by this one quote by Marion Ellerman that we started this conversation about. And she says this, and this made me think of you. You just need to be a flea against injustice. Enough committed fleas, biting strategically, can make even the biggest dog uncomfortable and transform even the biggest nation. So when you see a wrong, continue to be an upstander. And there are good people there who will support you. And again, it's a good thing to have these conversations because you want your community to be the best it absolutely can be.
On that note, thank you so much. And thank you guys for listening. And also thank you for listening on replay.